Hello and welcome. My name is Caroline Leem, and I'm the Vice President of Advocacy for the Casting Society of America. I'm so honored to welcome you to today's conversations with our amazing speakers, all of whom have invaluable insight to offer as artists, producers, directors, writers, and as members of the Asian American community. This is a particularly heightened time for the AAPI community. There's a legacy of violence against Asians and Asian Americans over history, with unprecedented increase just in the past year in the frequency of these unspeakable acts of violence and hatred. These conversations today lay the groundwork for support for our AAPI community and mirror the rise in activism and increase in social justice. The entertainment industry in particular has engaged in deepened reflection, rigorous conversation, and thoughtful and strategic action in order to stop these acts of hate, heal from the violence, and create ways to move forward. CSA is uplifting this work by sparking conversations with our allies, our peers, and colleagues in the field. These conversations only mark the beginning of the necessary work. None of this is perfect. While we don't propose to have all the solutions, we do hope these conversations and stories will shed some important truths. And through the work we do as casting directors, that we can continue to build a stronger and more equitable industry for everyone within it.
We all know that representation matters, and it all starts with storytelling and, of course, casting. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all the great casting directors who believed in me and gave me a shot. When I was growing up, it was just kind of cool to see maybe like one Asian person on TV, like seeing Bobby Lee on Mad TV. Oh my God, that was a big deal. And then when I started acting, we would just be lucky to be that one Asian person or one minority on a TV show. And of course, since Crazy Rich Asians, things have changed and it's been great. And there's more and more storytelling, but I think now we can have more than just one movie that's, representing Asians, more than one TV show like Fresh Off the Boat that's doing that. And more, as long as it's good storytelling, as long as it's good casting, and of course with a good actor and just good creatives behind a project, any real authentic story should deserve to be made that represents our real construct and real demographic of our world that we live in. So we hope to see the future to be, more representative and more equal for everyone.
If you have in your memory some casting experience or a performance experience from a role that you played that was significant for you, that changed your career, that was groundbreaking in some way, that validated your work or your identity or supported you or didn't, does anything come to mind? Something that says, yes, this was definitive for me as an actor, as an Asian actor, as an Asian American actor, as part of a project that may have been significant in the world.
For me, that's absolutely the Joy Luck Club. And I remember at the time my friends who had read the book, since it was a bestseller and millions of people had read it already, my friends with the best of intentions and don't know how the business works, called me and said, well, you have to be in this. As if it were that easy. And it just kind of felt like, a crapshoot, like it always is, just because you never know how, you're going to look against the other people that they've already cast, or, it's just so 90% visual that I just tried to calm myself down and say, I'm just going to do the best I can and see what happens. That's all we can ever do is just kind of work on our craft. And that's the only thing we can control. So that was a big deal for me to be a part of that project. That the book was so beloved, and I just didn't want to mess it up. And it's, I'm sure Russell will agree that having Amy Tan there, and it just was one of those special experiences that I'll never forget. And I feel like it kind of legitimized the whole Asian community, and that we have stories worth telling, and that people will actually pay money, the Asian community will support it. And it was kind of the beginning of that ball rolling.
Yeah, resonate with Lauren there. I mean, Joy Luck Club was definitely one of those parts that, like she said, quite significant. And this year was actually selected for the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress, which is really significant. And growing up, it was starting to get into films. I would talk to my brother, and my brother would mention this guy, Wang. He did Chen is Missing. And I'm like, wow. And he started talking about Chinese American stories. And this is what if the Chinese American filmmaker, he's the guy. And then I was fortunate enough to do Eat a Bowl of Tea with him. That was a significant role for me. And I remember that casting process, it just felt like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I've only been doing this for 10 months or something. And he flew me up to San Francisco and he said, no, just try this and then try that. And he's just so generous, you know.
My moment of transformation or transition or whatever moment, history making moment for me was All American Girl, because I'd spent 10 years in San Francisco doing Asian American theater where we wrote our own stories and told our stories. And I also did sketch comedy, and I did my mother for 8 years in sketch comedy and improv. And, you know, I'd lived with her my whole life, and I was horrified by her for a big part of my life because she had the big accent and everything. But when I started to actually create her as the human character, it was so wonderful to be able to bring her and all of her parts to a show that was, she's Japanese, not Korean, but you know, I followed a woman that was sort of my muse, but my mother was the core of that person. So I knew that I was creating something very authentic for this sitcom, and that shifted the trajectory of my career. And since then, I've been able to do many different Asian characters, Asian American characters, nondescript, who knows what I am characters. But in every instance, I feel like I've been given the gift of being able to create an authentic character, whoever she's from, wherever she's from. And that's, I think, because of what I created 25 years ago.
I think for me, it was a little film called Little Fish. It was a very transformative film for me on a personal level, as well as, since we're talking about Asian American representation, it was quite ahead of its time. And, you know, because it was sort of a love story between me and Kate Blanchett in a very non-exoticized way. They didn't make it a racial love story. I mean, my part could have been played by a regular guy, or in this case, an Australian white guy, or it could have been played by anybody. But I think the fact that it was Asian and specifically Vietnamese American, I thought it was very transformative and very ahead of its time in the way they treated it with the material. And of course, for me to be able to do that kind of work on a personal level, I felt it was a really kind of a very, certainly one of the highlights of my career in terms of my development as an actor. But I was quite proud of the image of Asian American that was presented in this film in a very non-Asian American way, if that makes any sense.
Totally, it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very fond of that personally still. Yeah.
So how do any of you feel about this? Let's talk about the gap then between, you say, 25 years later, an Asian American family is represented. 25 years later, in between Joy Luck and the next big movie. What is that about for you? And how do you feel about that? And all of the tropes and images and stereotypes and limited opportunities in between?
I feel as though this is like, there's been a huge shift where a film like Joy Luck Club was still looked as sort of a foreign film. I mean, it was about these people that they didn't know, and they didn't, you know, it was like this Chinese story, Chinese American story. And now when we've got Minari, it feels like an American story more with the people at large. Not, I mean, I don't perceive it that way, but I feel as though the general population is now looking at these stories and not separating them. They look like us. I mean, they are stories that I could tell about my family, you know, the people in the Midwest when they had to, you know, move and start another farm or something else. They don't see that these are, even though they're speaking, you know, half the time in Korean or something. So things are like things are really shifting, I feel, in the community of the global community, where they're seeing stories about people and they happen to be Asian. And those stories are unique and specific, but then they're universal.
I think real change happens very slowly, though, and
yeah,
it's because of a movie like Joy Luck Club that we've got people used to the water, so that by the time
yes,
Asians and Minari came around, they'd already seen a movie with an all Asian story and all Asian cast. It wasn't so jarring for them. But for me, I kind of feel like I'm happy for any change that occurs, and I try to take a positive look at things, and I feel like the industry, like most industries, runs on money. And Joy Luck Club was a small independent film that got some critical acclaim, but it didn't make a ton of money, whereas Crazy Rich Asians really did. And so I think that Hollywood sat up and took notice that there's some money to be made here. And it was exciting after that came out that there was a slew of Asian products, you know, projects on TV and film.
The climate is changed. It's shifted. Like last year, you get Parasite winning an award. This year, we got, you know, Chloe Zhao's film. It's fantastic. I love seeing that. So there is a shift going on.
And it feels like those movies are taking their place among the great movies ever made in a way. So there's no, and they're not even, oh, these are Asian films. These, as Amy said, these are, you know, or Lauren said, these are universal films that are about the world and about our human experience. And that helps people get past their stuff.
Yeah.
I think the stories are also coming from an Asian American point of view. I mean, John Chu is directing, Chloe Zhao is directing. Even if the story's not an Asian American story, it's an Asian American point of view that people go, oh, this is also something we understand. It's not, it doesn't become, you know, from over there or from another person that they can't relate to. Like, you know, Minari, or even now Aquafina's television series based on her life, and she's in charge of it. And she's, you know, so like Margaret 25 years ago wasn't able to force her story. They told her what the world wanted to see. And she, you know, it was always, oh, next season we'll get to your story. You know, I mean, that's been the frustration, I think, all along. We've written, we've gone to them, and you get, you know, can we swap out the Asian characters for some white, because we don't think Asians will watch this? Or, you know, do we need, so finally we have control of the narrative, and that is something that's really, I think, gonna shift.
It feels like, listen, there's an international door that's open in so many areas right now, especially with Netflix and what the expansion of international production. So there's an awareness and there's an opportunity there. There's still people have a limited idea of, is this a story I can relate to if I'm not Asian or Asian or Asian American? So
I think that's it right there, Risa. You know, I mean, it's never one thing, but you know, you cook a dish and you try to serve it. You know, there was a time where, you know, there's only like 10 people that you have exposure to serve the dish, but you know, the Netflix of the world, the Amazon of the world transcend the sort of the American border, or if you will, the North American border, Western border. So you got, you know, these streamers are able to cross borders now and present these wonderful work that in a lot of ways have always been there in terms of the capacity to make it. It's just now you're getting, you get the eyeballs, and you get to a lot more people with the streamers. And so people's taste is, all of a sudden they go, wow, you know, why haven't we seen this before? You know, why have we never heard of this director that did this movie called Parasite? You know, and they love Parasite, so they're going to start, oh, what has he done before? What has she done before? You know, so I think that in my opinion, you know, especially now that I'm producing films, it really changed a lot of the landscape that we're all talking about here. Because I think without the streamers, I think things will slow down quite a bit.
That's a really good point. And coming at it from a different angle, I'm always so proud every time I see that a movie's been produced, written, or directed by an Asian person, no matter what country. I'm tweeting it out and just feeling like this is a win for the whole community. And it makes me think about the fact that as a culture, I feel like the Asian culture has always valued education the most, which, at least in my case, you know, you either are supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer or something more academic. And so if you're in the arts, you are screwed. I mean, at least, and so it takes someone with enough drive and rebellion and to use that as a launching pad off of their parents' refusal to let them do that. So it's almost like my focus these days is trying to encourage young Asian people to go into the arts, to become an actor, to become a writer. You can do it. You can actually be a director. And so I've been teaching a lot and just trying to talk to Asian parents out there to say, encourage your kids. Go into the arts. Look, you know, like you can be a success. You can actually be a contributing member of society as an artist. And so I feel like, for me personally, that was kind of an uphill battle because my parents, well, my mom, thank God for my mom, because my dad was absolutely set against me going into this business. And so I feel at least like people in my generation had to, you know, come up against that. I think things are a little bit looser now, but anytime like I'm talking to any kind of Asian parent, I'm like, so, you know, how do you feel about that? Like, it's okay, right? Like if your kids want to go, and I know it's scary because I have kids myself, and you want them to be able to make a living, and it's hard as an artist, as an actor, whatever, to get guaranteed, you know, a logical ABCDE path by any means. But I feel like in order to shift this whole movement into, you know, forward, that's also going to be required. And as well, like politically too, like that we've been raised to be the silent minority, to be polite and not speak up. All of that is changing now because we have no choice anymore. We have to speak up. And so I kind of feel like those barriers are being broken through politically as well. So there have been some shifts for the better, I think, around Asian culture.
And seeing these people, I mean, seeing role models like that now, because growing up, I never saw anybody that looked like me anywhere. So I didn't even see that that was a possibility. My parents were supportive. They didn't know anything about any of this, but, you know, they just were happy that I wasn't, you know, a delinquent. So, yeah, they were always supportive of anything I wanted to do, but there was nobody that looked like me anywhere. And now kids growing up can see on TV or in the Oscars, or, you know, they can see people, a diversity of people, and think, oh, you know, I love to do something like that. I think I could do it. If they have a passion for it, at least, you know, there's somebody.
Well, stories need to be told and created and pitched and made.
Yes.
That's what's going to change it, and not waiting for permission. But it's such an incredible point that you're making about a whole new generation of potential filmmakers and artists coming out and seeing what's possible, whether in, you know, Asian Americans or any beyond the borders of the United States. And
that's where I think we're at now, is that we're able to do that. We're able to take all of our stories, all of our history, And like any one of us could write our story and actually have it become a film. I mean, and why? Because of all the history there and the experience there and the shift that is going on. So that's one thing I'm kind of encouraged about.
But have you seen more opportunity that isn't defining a character as specifically Asian or Asian American?
I have. I think it's opening up. I mean, you look at Bridgerton, what Shonda Rhimes did.
That's crazy.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's and I love seeing that kind of thing. And I do think it has opened up. And I just did a character on a show called Goliath on Amazon, and that had nothing to do with my being Asian at all. And I don't even think it's mentioned. And that was one of the most joyous experiences for me. So I think that it is starting to open up, but I still kind of feel like that my chances are better when it's written for someone that's Asian.
Okay.
Yeah, because, if I'm going up against someone that's blonde and blue-eyed, like, that it's wide open. And so that you have to be even that much more like amazing and break through all of that other competition in order to snag a role like that. So I'm not sure. I kind of feel like I wish it was more the way that you're from New York, Risa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the theater, when I started out in New York theater, it was so all about the essence of a person, much more than what they look like. And film is so visual. So it was quite a shock when I moved to Los Angeles because I didn't know what people were talking about as far as being typecast and not being able to go up for roles until I got to LA. Because in New York in theater, I felt like it was way more colorblind casting. So I didn't understand that.
Yeah. No, I get that about theater. And I will say, Dustin, also, and this is challenging sometimes when you're starting a project and the lead role is a woman who's 35 and smart and beautiful and yada, yada, the lead of the show. And then it's like, it could be anybody. The entire show could be defined by any actor whatsoever. And you kind of go, all right. And so anything is possible. And while that's wonderful, then it takes extra time for people to figure out what story they're telling, because suddenly it's a family on a farm in Virginia, and it's very different if it's a Black family, if it's an Asian family, if Latina family, or if it's a Caucasian family. And do you mix it up like Bridgerton and say it doesn't matter? They could be brother and sister, and so then so nobody knows what that is. And so I think right now it's sort of, we're opening the door, anything is possible, and then it's really up to you as actors to step into it and to say, I'm claiming this role, and whether or not people see you as that or not, it does. Right. There's possibility, but it's not well defined, and nobody knows what they're doing. So it's a bit of the Wild West.
I still have hope for more roles, interesting roles, and that are just about humanity more than it is about race, because like the world is more diverse. I mean, we have more platforms to see other people's lives, and I don't know. For me, I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Risa, and the Casting Association for organizing all this, because it's just wonderful to see these steps, and they are steps, and they're important steps.
It makes us feel seen, that you would care to know what we think, and so thank you. This was wonderful.
It's necessary, and I really, and on behalf of the CSA, really appreciate you showing up and talking honestly about this. It's just, let's continue all having this conversation and being active out of that.
Being part of the AAPI community is an integral and invaluable part of who I am as a playwright and screenwriter. Not only because I write stories about Asian and Asian American characters such as M. Butterfly or Yellowface or Soft Power, but because I bring a valuable perspective even to stories that are not specifically Asian, such as the Disney Broadway musicals, Aida and Tarzan, or my current project, the live-action feature film adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame. Furthermore, as we see in the current horrific spike of anti-Asian hate attacks, representation is not only just, it can be a matter of life and death. When we are not seen as human, then it is easier to attack and hate us. And nowadays, fortunately, I can pitch Asian stories without white protagonists to producers and studios, and I have a chance of getting them made. There's sometimes a bottleneck, and that bottleneck is casting. Throughout my 40-year career, around the country, theaters have often said to me, well, we can't do your shows because we can't find the actors. AAPI artist community, we're part of a larger movement. We feel solidarity with other BIPOC and marginalized communities because we've all been caricatured, stereotyped, turned into one- and two-dimensional characters, created and sometimes even portrayed by people who don't know who we are. We have all been denied opportunity. And yet, our identities, and this is true no matter who you are, the identities are fundamental to making our best art. Because the thing that makes you different, the thing that makes you unique, idiosyncratic, weird, that is your superpower as an artist.
When we talk about power dynamics, what exists on paper, job titles or what people understand versus how power manifests itself, whether it's in an audition room or on set or in a writer's room, etc. They're two very different things in theory and in practice. So I was wondering, what are some of the power dynamics that you guys were surprised to find in entertainment?
I think power dynamics, sometimes we can kind of confuse it with misrepresentation of our cultures or the way they want to present us or all of the above, which we at some point, and this might take us on a tangent, accept or don't accept. And I think at this particular point, I've come to not accept that anymore. It's taken a bit. The power dynamics that I've experienced within series work, especially going from week to week on a certain show and finding appropriate things for your particular culture or who you're playing, and whether they choose to not follow those things or do follow those things, or don't ask for your advice or do ask for your advice, or just say this is the way you whatever. It all happens, from that to us feeling, again, the whole model minority issue. And I will say that I'm completely guilty of these particular things. I grew up feeling like I wasn't worth enough to be able to speak up in terms of an audition room or somewhere on set, where I felt like, oh, I'm going to lose this job if I speak up, or I'm not worthy of speaking up because I have a job and I'm Asian. And there aren't too many jobs. So what do we do? I mean, I think that we've all experienced it. No one here is, I mean, I've known these guys for a long time, and we talk about it all the time.
I think what surprised me getting into this is just how every step along the way throughout this process or throughout this life of being an actor, the system is set up to disempower the artist. And it's one of those things that you kind of go in, like Reggie said, like you don't realize till later in the game just how much we're sort of like being deferent to every single person along the way, and that deference disempowers us, right? And then constantly, and the less we're empowered, the less we feel that we're empowered, the less the less pure and the less free we are to do what it is exactly we're here to do, which is act, right? And I think that to me is something that, again, like Reggie said, it took a while. Certainly it took a while for me to realize. I was like, oh, I need to find a way of mitigating all of that disempowerment every step along the way, so I can do what it is that I was, I could sort of slip into the thing that I was gifted to be able to give to the world. And I don't mean that in a pat myself on the back sort of way, but in a sort of metaphorical sort of way. And that to me is what I am so happy with this rise in advocacy, because it's re-empowering us as artists to be able to do what it is, to authentically tell stories the way, quite frankly, storytellers want them to be told, the way writers and creators want their stories to be told. Because now with this power, we're able to do what it is that we're gifted to do. I think that to me is the thing that shocked me, just literally every step along the way. I thought, once I get past this thing, then I'll be empowered, right? Once you get this part, you'll be empowered. Move past this level of anything, I'll be empowered. Go past a casting director, I'll be empowered. Get to a producer level, you'll be empowered. Every step along the way, there's still this systemic oppression that is still pushing you down and disempowering you. And now I feel like I have the knowledge and the wherewithal to mitigate it. And that to me is what has been the most useful now this stage in my career.
I find everyone talks about in an audition room, a casting director has more power than the actor or the artist, right? But I found as a young looking Asian woman, if I'm in a room with someone who is older or white or thinks that they've had more experience in the business than I do, that power shift, it knocks me on. And all of a sudden, I don't have the authority that I was hired to do. And it comes as a woman, there's that dynamic when I'm in a room full of men. If I'm the youngest person in the room, if I'm the oldest person in the room, it all of a sudden, it doesn't quite matter what my job title is. I'm still butting against, it's parallel to the systems of oppression that we talk about, because there's the society power dynamics that is now come on top of how we operate within this industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Rodney and Reggie and everything that they've said. I think for me, being, a Filipina American Asian woman and a transgender woman, I find myself constantly being in a position of being at the bottom of the totem pole. And whenever I'm in a space of thinking that I have power, especially because as an actor, as a trained actor, I feel my most powerful when I'm, doing my craft. But that's a different thing when you're trying to get booked. And that's where we realize we literally have no power. And the thing that always trumps me a lot is my gratitude being mistaken for contentment. So if I'm in a space in an audition room, or even when I'm hired to be on set, the expectancy is that I'm grateful. And I am, truly. We're all grateful to have the opportunity, as little as it is. But once I start to speak up, and once I start to sort of name the injustices, then, it becomes a different thing. It becomes, my discontentment suddenly is translated into being a diva or being unhinged. And that's where, I feel like the power dynamics really, really comes into play.
How and when are we empowered to speak up? Because so many times I feel our colleagues who are in the majority, they get away with a lot more stuff than we do. Like, we hear stories of Ben Affleck, for example, not wanting to wear a certain hat on set, and it becomes like a funny story. Oh, and that's, some actor gets to be method and sends rats to his colleagues, and it's just a myth and it's a thing. But if we dare to say something, we're perceived as being difficult, or, someone who is too PC, and are we going to want them to be on set? So it's a difficult line. Have any of you, were there moments that you that are positive in which you felt empowered to speak up and it was received well?
We would like to explain your ethnicity now. We want to give you the choice, but we figure since you're Filipino, you'd want to be Filipino. I said, yes, please, Filipino. the second largest Asian American community in the United States and the least represented in the media of all the Asian American communities. So it is, but I've experienced that of late, and I think people are starting to get the gist and of just, they don't, like Rain said, it's like, you know what, being Filipino and is not the biggest part of me. There's vulnerability, there's excitement, there's compassion, there's all of the above that I would love to play in a role, but they're not written. So where are those? Where I just get to play this normal guy, having a normal day. Maybe I'm in love or not. That's always been like my thing, is like, can we have that? And not have to be the Asian. I know you'll get to that, but the number 3 or 5 on the call sheet or whatever. So yes, there is some positivity that is happening.
It took a while for it to get to a place where I was like, oh, you are seeing me, right? And I'll give 3 very quick, simple examples, but they were all sort of one example. But like my experience on Parks and Recreation, my experience on Wilfred, and my experience on Barry, all 3 of those parts were not written for very specifically a Filipino person. Specifically, Parks and Rec was written for a Japanese. They wanted a Japanese person too, but they called me in. Well, anyway, in all 3 instances, very specifically, David Zuckerman, Amy Poehler, Mike Schur, and Bill Hader asked me on set, what's your ethnic background? And I got a little nervous. I was like, am I going to keep a job by telling them I'm Filipino? I was like, fuck it. At this point, I'm just going to tell them Filipino. And in all 3 instances, they go, great, that's exactly what we need to know. The next day, the character was changed and the background is Filipino. And it's moments like that, man, I mean, like, talk about it, it's this respite in this desert of like desperation for someone to see you as such. And those are beautiful moments that do exist. I have always said the people in this industry that get it, right? They really do. And those are the people that, I mean, we are all sort of navigating the waters to try and find.
Do you feel like sometimes, like, I feel like, I mean, for the 2 recurring roles that I've had, they've been specifically written for a Filipina. One was based on an actual person, so she is actually Filipina. And the other one was, I have no idea to this day why, and I don't know why I never asked, like, why did you want to make her specifically Filipina? I was just his wife. I was this character's wife. I was Filipina. I had, half Filipino kids. And, that was awesome because I could just, that's what it was. It was nothing more, nothing less.
For me, whenever I'm working on a show, I do immediately look to see who wrote it or who's producing on it. And oftentimes, in regards to my gender identity or being Asian American, I'm usually the only one. And so immediately it's like, oh, okay, so I'm being tokenized here. I'm being tokenized for my transness or for being Asian American, especially if it's mentioned in the first 5 pages of the script. It doesn't give an audience the opportunity to really get to know the character for just being a character. And immediately it's this basic plot point that I was brought in for. And going back to power dynamics, if there isn't a transgender writer on the show or one of us on the show, it really gives them an opportunity to play oppression Olympics with our community, with every marginalized community, because then the conversation becomes, well, who's the most marginalized person on the planet now? Let's get that person. And so immediately I'm erased because I'm not Asian enough, I'm not person of color enough, and I'm not trans enough. And it becomes about that regardless of how talented I am or talented all of us are in this room. And that's where, going back to the point about writing, why it's so important that it really starts from the top. It really starts from the network and the EPs and the producers and the writers' room, because that's how we're really going to reflect actual stories that is representational of how the world exists today.
The thing that I learned, and I really attribute this to Black Lives Matter movement, and something that I'm very grateful for that movement, is that it's taught me to really understand the deep understanding of it. Is not my job to fix this issue. It is your call to action. It must be your call to action. The powers that be, the producer, the directors, the casting directors, and actors in positions of power, for them to reach out. Speaking to what Rain was saying, right? Like, yeah, 100% we should be writing our stuff. We should be creating our stuff. But my call to action are to producers to say, hey, what are the stories of the marginalized or the marginalized groups that we are not representing? And let's reach out to those people. Who are people who are interested in producers, who are part of marginalized intersectional groups? Let's reach out to those people. Let's have them apprentice us. Let's have them like intern for us. So we set them up for success. Because if anything, the Black Lives Matter has shown that they have not been set up for success. Right? They have not been set up on any level for success. And that is the same now with intersectional groups as well. And particularly if we're speaking to this group, Filipinos as well. Like, how can we really set them up for success? And that's to do the work ourselves, right? And that to me is something that I think is really the next phase of this. Yes, producers can say, oh, I'm going to produce this. I'm going to produce fresh off the boat. Right? But are they setting people up for success by putting them in executive producer positions? Are they giving them deals, overalls at the network so that they can take that job and translate it and continue to move up the ladder that way? Because, you know, we know tokenism is tokenism. At the end of the day, they could reach out to actors and people of color all they want. And, you know, we know I would say that, you know, Ellen and I know that as part of the NBC Diversity Showcase, I know what that was. I'm not dumb. You know what I mean? I know that they were able to call like the powers that be and say, hey, we had a showcase of a bunch of diverse people. But are they truly setting you up for success? That to me is the next phase of this.
You know, vice versa. I reached out to my Grimm showrunners, and two of them who are Caucasian, and one reached out to me. I reached out to the other. One reached out to me and said, would you develop a project with me? And I said, absolutely. He's like, I need you now in this atmosphere to get in the room. And I'll tell you what, you better darn tootin', I'm going to do it, you know, because it's like, yes, and I need you to get in the room.
I've been doing a lot of clubhouse rooms lately because hello pandemic and I live alone and I'm bored. But I rebelled against there was an actor asked a question about like how do we as casting, you know, deal with like roles that are hard to find, and people are giving the answers and I'm sitting there and I was like, why does this question bother me? You know, and it was just the way that the question was phrased, nothing to do about the person asking, because it was a genuine question out of sincerity. And I realized it was the word hard. And I was like, it's not hard. It's just our job. And we do it all the time. And if we can search for thousands of people to play Harry Potter, then we should be able to like find whomever we need, however we need to do so. And it's not that it's difficult. It's just that the talent pool is there. And yes, some are smaller than others, but that doesn't mean they're any less valid or credible or good. And the reality is in my career so far, I hear it all the time, in particular to the trans community and the Asian communities. Producers always immediately think it's going to be quote unquote difficult or hard to cast a role that is culturally specific or specific on gender identity.
I always tell people, give them any one of our phones. Like they can go through my phone book and they will find every single person that they're looking for through that phone. Right? I mean, like,
and I always respect the casting directors who actually have reached out to fellow, and I can just, you know, speak specifically to Phil Am, but you know, I've had, you know, a handful of auditions because somebody like Rodney or another fellow Phil Am actor friend of ours, Jason Rogel, he's like, they've been in touch with him and they've like, look, we're looking for Filipinas or that, you know, can you give us a list? Because, you know, and he does it, you know, and it's like, it's easy. It's such a lame excuse. And that would have bugged me too. Hearing the word hard. hard. It's this conversation is greatly needed, and I, thank you so much, Tanya, for bringing up all of these amazing questions and in this conversation, because it does need to happen more.
Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to do some quick introductions. This is part of Casting Society of America's AAPI Awareness Month initiative. We're doing several of these little small group discussions. This one in particular is about an international perspective. What are some of the things you feel like you're constantly struggling with when it comes to Hollywood approaching you for some of your international clients?
Where do I start? I think it's very much that a lot of them don't know and don't understand what Asia is and what's happening in Asia. And, a lot of times they just think China is Asia, but it's not. There's China and then there's Southeast Asia, which, or Asia, which also includes Korea and Japan and Indonesia and Singapore and Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, which have huge populations. I mean, just in Korea, Korea, Japan, Indonesia alone, right? And they have stars from everywhere, and they're very well-respected actors from everywhere in these regions as well. And a lot of times I feel that they may not understand who they are. So a lot of it's my job and our jobs, to educate and try and make them understand who these people are, so that they would at least give them the respect that these actors deserve for having years and decades in the industry, and not just require them to read for, just a simple supporting role when they're such big, well-known actors. And we may send materials, but I get it. Sometimes people just don't have the time to read everything. But I think that that's one of the main things. They need to do a deep dive and learn about who these people are, so that they can bring their talent and their fans and their markets to the conversation.
What are some examples specifically about the disrespect that you sometimes feel? Like, is it pay? Is it role size? Is it, perks? Like,
it's everything. I think it's across the board, and I think Chris may agree with me, but I think it's across the board. Usually over here, and I understand, it needs a Caucasian actor or a well-known Hollywood actor. Let's not use Caucasian, a well-known Hollywood actor to open an American film. I get it, but then they never budget enough for the Asian actors that they want. And so there's that. And then, everybody thinks, I won't say everybody, a lot of people think that all these foreign actors are just dying to work in American films. And that's not true, because their markets are big enough as it is. They don't need to work in American films. I mean, it'd be nice, it'd be lovely for them to experiment and see how it's done here, but it's not their bread and butter, if that makes sense. And a lot of times they don't know how to audition. If they're in China or in Taiwan or in Indonesia, because they've never had to, or if they did, it's also difficult for them to find the right reader in English.
Right.
And that, I think, spoils the audition for them, because they're not at the top of the game. They're just grabbing any assistant that speaks English to come and read with them. And it's just not optimal.
Totally agree with Andrew wholeheartedly. I mean, I've experienced everything that he said. There's instances that that Andrew brought up that kind of brought a certain memory or an example, as you will. I remember this was kind of recent too. I mean, this movie just came out, but when they were casting for it, I remember the casting director, just kind of checking the veils for certain names. And I was helped facilitating that by, checking in with some of the talents out there. And then at the same time, you're educating our partners in the casting world who these people are, because not a lot of them know who are. I mean, they're probably just getting a list from the producers or the studio saying like, hey, check these names because I feel like they would help elevate the film in some way, which is great. They're giving people opportunities and chances. And then when an official offer comes through and you're looking at it and then you're thinking, wow, you're it's almost kind of a disrespect in a sense, like they didn't really educate themselves to see like how popular that actor could be or is in their respective country or market. One time I had a scale offer scale offer for a studio movie, and I was like, oh man, there's no way I could present this. The actor is kind of equivalent to like a Ryan Gosling out here. You know what I mean? Like he's not gonna do, yeah. If I present this, they're just gonna laugh at me, and it's gonna make me look bad. So, I tried educating the casting department, letting them know like, yeah, there's just no way. And I mean, they came up a little bit. I remember they came up for like a Schedule F agreement, and the casting director was like, you should be so lucky, or I mean, that actor should be so lucky to just even get this. At that point, I was like, oh, no, I mean, this is still kind of disrespectful. But I mean, we managed to get it up to an appropriate amount. But I mean, there's a couple instances that I remember throughout my career that I've actually experienced that firsthand, which is kind of annoying.
Casting people, I feel, are respectful and they do understand more where we come from than the studio executives and business affairs, for example. Right, business affairs. Their only job is to close the deal for as little money as they can pay to the actor with as little perks as possible. I get it, but sometimes I feel that it helps if business affairs was also to understand who these people are.
So maybe on a casting part, that requires a little bit more communication to producers and executives and that whole team.
Exactly. I think I think Chris and my job is to educate people around us on who these actors are. But it would help a great deal if we had that help to educate other people and pass the word down. This is who this person is.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to segue into that with Ludi. Do you find that you still have to audition every single time when it's a Hollywood project versus opportunities that come from Asia? Are those more offers?
I don't mind auditioning for any role, really, as sometimes we don't send in the tape. Sometimes I just do it for fun. I look at auditioning as a part of the process of getting to know who we are. And when I'm working in Asia, that process is a little bit different. Over there, sometimes it's karaoke, sometimes they invite you out sometimes they invite you out for a meal, sometimes it's a full-out interview, or sometimes it's poetry reading. You can't expect what's to come, but it shows the disparity between how different cultures get to know people. And over here in Hollywood, we're used to the system of just auditioning, and that's how a new casting director or a new director or producer gets to know the actors. And that's perfectly fine for me. It's a lot of fun. I think one thing is the audition process can be a limiting factor, although it's a long-lasting tradition in Hollywood. It's just this process of auditioning, but it's sometimes hard because we also have a tradition of typecasting and stereotyping in Hollywood. And although we're in what I hope is enlightenment, a reawakening right now, but it's that sense of putting people in a box are still instilled in a lot of people's minds, whether you be casting directors and even the actors themselves. They feel like they read a script, oh, I know what this is. Someone's tried to fit me in a box. I just got to go in and perform this. So if an audition process is a process of getting to know the person, but you already have a preconception of what this person is based on what you've learned before, what came previously, it's very hard for your mind to make that turn. And I think to open your mind to what this person is actually like. and what they can actually do.
Chris and Andrew, I wanted to get your perspectives too on, you know, really kind of the last 5 years. I think everybody has noticed a lot of Asian-led projects, a lot of mostly Asian casts, which hasn't happened historically. And I wanted to get your guys' perspective on what's been good about that and what we still need to work on when it comes to those types of projects.
I mean, I love the fact that there's more stories and opportunities being, you know, presented to us. I think that's great. You know, like one thing that I had mentioned to Jenny before was that there's still not a whole lot, and we obviously can't be picking and choosing. You know, you're putting somebody up, and then casting directors are most likely asking, like, is this person a certain ethnicity? And if I'm reading the sides or the script and don't see any like context about them speaking a certain language, I usually ask them, like, does it matter? And they usually say yes. And I'm like, why? You know, like you have celebrities like Chris Hemsworth, who's Australian, playing American, or Benedict Cumberbatch, who's British, playing American, and vice versa. So why does it matter that I have a Korean actor playing Chinese or a Japanese actor playing, you know, Korean?
I completely agree with Chris. You know, I don't want Asian actors and actresses to be pigeonholed. It's very, very dangerous if we keep going down this road. You know, like you have British playing Germans, and so why can't Koreans play Chinese if the script is not ethnic specific? If it doesn't require them to speak a language fluently, and you know, and you also have Korean actors who speak Mandarin fluently. Let's give it that. You know, so why can't they? You know, I think I almost feel that Hollywood is so afraid of offending that they purposely try and make sure that, you know, in this project everyone has to be Chinese.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that that's very dangerous.
Ludi and Yoson, do you guys see roles that are very specific to your type, or do you see a lot of roles that are open to any Asian ethnicity? Do you go out for roles that are, you know, of a different culture than your own?
I wouldn't want to push for diversity for the sake of diversity, per se. It's about accurate representation of communities. Yeah, and I feel like personally, I would like to go beyond, you know, just being able to play Chinese.
Have you played other?
I have not. No.
Ludi, have you?
I guess I played Chinese Malaysian. I played different dialects of Chinese. I've gone out for a lot of things. Have I played Korean? Have I played Korean, Andrew?
I don't think so.
I've gone out for a lot of things, but the first question I always ask if I'm asked to play a role with a different culture is whether I'm giving enough time. Am I given enough time and the resources to be able to do it authentically? Because I don't want to be feeling like I'm like the mongoose that stole someone's chicken on set, where I'm sweating bullets and just trying to, you know, feel like I don't want to feel like I'm getting away with something. I want to be there and I want to have fun. I want to represent the role authentically. So time and resources are the number one.
I have heard of productions, you know, going down a certain road with actors and then deciding, okay, well, we really do need Chinese. So this actor can't be considered. And I think at that point, you've opened the door to it. Why not just keep that door open?
Yeah, I mean, if it's like, you know, a historic or a certain story that is an iconic character, then yes. Like I remember, I think they were casting for, it was George Nolfi's film, Birth of the Dragon. And they're casting for the lead role of Bruce. You know, we've sent multiple people in. I think one of the guys that they really, really liked was a Korean actor of mine. And he came down to, I think he was like top 3 for the role. He ended up not getting it because of his ethnicity. And we understood, I mean, it's Bruce. You know, like he's Chinese, and I think there would be a lot of flack. But then fast forward a few years later, he was cast in Quentin's movie, you know, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I think Quentin just did not care the fact that he was Korean. He was just the best person for that role to play Bruce, that he just cast him for the role of Bruce. We did get the flack online. You know, there was a lot of haters. There were some people that didn't like the fact that he was Korean playing a very iconic role, and that he was, you know, ethnically Chinese.
I feel like as, you know, Asian men who have a lot of international clients, Chris and Andrew, and as, you know, Asian men who are really the next generation of our stars, Yoson and Ludi, like what would like equity mean to you? Is there something specific?
A lot of the tapes or sides that I get sometimes, it's not even specifically written for Asian. It's just casting. They don't know what they want, you know, and they just like, it's open casting, and it's like, what, my name's not, you know, I have an Asian last name, and my last name's not Marshall. Why am I auditioning for this role? I think it'd be great if there were more, you know, roles that were written to represent the community accurately, and you know, and more targeted that way. And also, I recently, this is something I learned recently from this previous job I did in Australia, and it's relevant for America as well, and New Zealand, is that I did a show in the 1800s called New Go Mountain, and I didn't know that the Chinese have been in the gold rush eras since the early 1800s. A lot, you know, arrived at the same time as the white man in America, Australia, and New Zealand. But still, from time to time, I still get asked when I'm on the street, so where are you from? Like, sure, I get it. Like, I'm an immigrant myself, but like, Asians still aren't seen as the native populace, which is absurd, because I mean, like, we were here at the same time as you guys. So that
That's
doesn't
my
make sense.
shirt. I'm from here.
Hey, where can I buy one of those? That's awesome.
I'll send you a link.
This might derail a little bit from casting, but it's ultimately comes down to media, you know, where we grew up watching so much television, and the way kids are influenced by watching what they see. If it's not represented accurately from what people see, and you know, then people are going to have this false sense of illusion of who these, you know, groups of communities are, like Asians, Indians, and whatnot, where it's, you know, it's really not who they are. They're just being misrepresented. And yeah, it's just having that accurate sense of representation from the top down, straight from storytelling, and then it trickles down.
I love what you said. I think the worst thing that you can do to an actor or any person out there is for them feeling like they're unheard. That's the worst, when you can't express yourself. I really feel like people suffocate under those conditions. So I think when all that goes away, when we're not just seen on a spectrum of being ethnic or not ethnic, Asian or not Asian, but we're actually seen as a full palette of a human being, you know, because with intersectionality, we live on so many different dimensions, you know, masculine, feminine, Asian, not Asian, whatever political leanings that we have, family background. We're not just one straight line. And that's what makes an actor and a person really, really interesting. So when we get that, when we can feel that with every single Asian role, an Asian character that can be portrayed in that way on screen, I think that's when we'll get equity.
Beautiful.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I would also like to see equity in the executive ranks too. You know, the people that have those positions of powers and those decision-making, you know, abilities, that people from our community can actually be in that, have a seat at the table, as you will. You know, I feel like a lot of families, you know, Asian families, they don't really see this as a viable career opportunity. And I think if we just educate them more and more and let them know that, hey, this is a viable career opportunity, and, you know, we can succeed. And I think in the past, they didn't believe that, because the type of stuff that they were seeing on TV and movies the roles that were just kind of relegated to us and very stereotypical. That's just how the way the mainstream media portrayed us, and that's just kind of the way society perceived us. But I think things are changing now. The last 5 years have been changing. I feel like there's more stories written for us. There's more and more accurate representation. And I think if we have more people in the executive ranks who have those ability to green light and tell more stories about us, I think that's going to be, I guess you could say, like more equity in that respect.
Agreed.
And for equity, I think it also comes down not just in terms of pay or it's the respect again. I keep going back to respect, right? Respect the actor for who they are, for what they've done. You and I were speaking earlier, and there's a story that was relating to you about what was happening on what was one of the most successful films in recent history for Asian Americans, right? And our client, Lisa Liu, when they offered the role, and she's a 3-time Golden Horse winner, goodness. She's the only she's the only person in Hollywood that can vote in the Emmys, the Oscars, SAG, and the Hollywood Foreign Press.
She's 92 years old, and she does 94 years old,
and would not educate himself on who she was, which is really, really frustrating. Wouldn't give us the proper credit, would not even give her front end credit. It was crazy, and in the end, it's like he went and said, "Well, we can't, the producers and for whatever he was using, I'm sure he was using the producer's name, but we cannot give it to her unless she has precedent." It's like, oh my God, you want precedent? I'll give you precedent. I sent him posters. I downloaded posters online of Lisa Liu with Jimmy Stewart, Lisa Liu with this actor from 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. I sent a whole slew of it to him. Is that enough precedent? Respect us, please.
Yeah.
Respect her for who she is. She, not just because she's an Asian actor, but look at her body of work. Do your research.
Yeah, I think we are very egocentric when it comes to who means something to us. And that's, something we really need to work on, and we need to educate others on. Is just because you might not know them doesn't mean that they're not a big deal, not worthy.
I think what I want to say is that look at agents and managers and the actors as your allies to the casting society. Look at us as your allies. We're, just as much as you want the best actor for the role, realize that we are also trying to get you the best actor for the role. We're not trying to fight you and make your life difficult. We're just really trying to help you. And yes, we may push our clients, but people who know me will also know that if I don't have the clients that are right for the role, I will recommend someone that I think is right. In terms of language or whatever, if I don't have, go to this person, please. So
that's awesome.
We're not we're here to help you, just let's have and that's why I'm so happy for this. Let's have an open conversation. If you don't know, please ask.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all of you. And I think our members and Hollywood in general, we've brought up a lot of issues here that I think need to be addressed. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
Jenny.
Always,
Andrew. Thanks, Yoson.
Hey, it's Cal Penn. All right, so this is a really interesting question. How has my ethnic or cultural identity sort of impacted my experience in Hollywood? The first thing I think of is one of the first real parts I got in a studio comedy. It was a supporting lead in a movie called Van Wilder, and the name of the character that I played was Taj Mahal. So that was literally his name. And I remember, this was back in 2000, not that long ago, by the way. 2000 was a year after the NSYNC song Bye 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 came out, just for reference, just so you're not like, oh, this was during black and white times. No, this was fairly recent. But I remember that, that audition process was sort of like, you'd go into the audition room and there were white dudes in brownface who were going out for the same role. And it kind of answered that question for performers of color, or at least South Asian American performers. Do I have a fair shot at something? It's like, no, you're not allowed to read for the part of Colby from Ohio, but you can read for Taj Mahal, and so can the guy who goes out for Colby from Ohio. So I just remember, the knowledge that you had to work 1,000 times harder than everybody else was sort of on top of the thing that you already know as an actor, which is that every actor is going to get or not get parts because they're too tall, too short, too fat, too skinny, whatever it is. But it felt like being Brown at the time, you didn't have the luxury of being too tall, too short, too fat, too skinny, whatever the other two that you are happens to be. And so that was the first time that I sort of realized, wow, this is something else. This is something different than just every actor being desperate for a part or being passionate about what we do for a living as storytellers. So anyway, the reason I bring up that kind of first memory is it was a lot more binary, or at least it felt a lot more binary at the time. Obviously, there are huge challenges that we have to deal with even today. But I kind of look at the benchmarks over time, and I'm kind of, kind of think, thankfully, the number of people who could try to get away with naming a character Taj Mahal and putting dudes in brown face, not non-existent, let's be clear, that would still happen today. But I feel like it would happen a lot less. And so, that's a good thing. Also, I apparently own a pineapple plantation. I took all my money from playing Taj Mahal and I opened a pineapple plantation. That's not what you wanted to hear about. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, hello, welcome. It's Asian Heritage Month, and that is why we are gathered here, and really to celebrate the achievements and the accomplishments so far, and to inspire the people who are watching and let them know how you got there and how they can be sitting right where you are. Every one of ours path was very unique and different and somewhat accidental, happy accidents, and casting was not something that I even thought, I didn't know about it, and I fell into it too. And so I just encourage the people who are watching to have your own path and just take the opportunities, and you never know where it's going to lead to. To achieve, one must set goals. So I wanted to talk about goals for a minute. How have yours evolved from when you started out?
I'll say that, the goals were like, just get a job, any kind of speaking role, any kind of gig. And then that kind of like fed my appetite for wanting more authentic story, getting roles that like creatively was stimulating to my soul and not just soul sucking. And then it's kind of led me to a place of like, wow, I'm still ferociously hungry for stories, and I'm not getting the roles that I want, nor are there enough stories for me. So now let's make our own stories. So that's kind of like the path that I've taken.
The way our goals have changed is that back then, the best you could hope for would be that if some white showrunner decided to throw you a crumb and had some sort of secondary or tertiary character for you, and it would be a bonus if you didn't have to speak with an accent. But those were just the little tiny crumbs that you were like, begging for, and you were supposed to be grateful for it. And I think that things have changed now over the last like 10 to 15 years to the point where, we're done with crumbs. We're over that shit. And we're like, why are we constantly supporting other people's stories? Like, why can't we tell our own stories? And also, like, can we stop being treated like a monolith? Because Asians are not a monolith. There's so many different types of Asians. And then even within like any one like ethnic group, there's so many different types of people. There's so many different types of stories. We have our own socioeconomic differences too, And so why can't we have all of those stories? And I think that what kind of scared executives keep seeing over and over, whether how openly they acknowledge it is up for debate, but what we see over and over is that when you get more specific with people's actual experiences, when people's real lives, it actually feels much more universally relatable the more specific you get and the more real you get and the more grounded you get with people's real stories. And so I think that, we've come to a point where we've realized we don't have to beg for crumbs. We should be able to dictate what the menu is, and we should be able to serve the menu that we want to serve.
Well said.
I think it's one, important, as you all said, that we push Asian American stories. It's two, important to recognize that we are not a monolith and that there are many, many, many different stories. But it's also important that we not get shoved in a niche category because, for example, for Jude, she's an excellent director. So she should take any script. She should be able to direct anything. And she shouldn't be thought of simply as, oh, I have this Asian character and this is like set in Chinatown, so let's send that to Jude. But everything else is going to go to my regular American director. What? No.
I would love to see, you know, how you feel things have changed since you broke in the industry, if you feel anything. Because I
think
know
a drastic change from like 10 or 15 years ago. Absolutely. But the drastic change that I'm seeing is seeing like, you know, BIPOC showrunners. Like the only reason why we got one episode in Lovecraft that's set in Korea from a woman's perspective and from a Black soldier perspective is because of Misha Green, you know? So it requires putting faith in, you know, different showrunners. Like that's the biggest drastic change that I've seen. And like, never had I thought that in a million years of my career that I would be doing an episode 80% in Korean. So, you know, yeah, that's a huge change. Do we still have a long way to go? Absolutely. Are those like few and far between? Yes. Yeah. It's rare. Can we even get, you know, the support of the Asian community to watch it? That's a different story, you know? And I think the thing is, it's like, you know, we're demanding visibility, but that also comes with supporting Asian stories, you know?
And Asian stories come from people like Jude,
exactly,
Jessica, and people behind the scenes. And then actors get those opportunities, and then they just get better at auditioning, and they get better at playing lead roles. They get more set experience. And then my database of Asian actors grows to choose from, and I get to not choose from the 5 that I have on a list, you know? So I think it's all really going in an exciting new direction. Well, I would love to talk about, do you remember the moment that you guys felt you broke through or went to the next level? And can you share a little bit about that in the industry?
I've been so fortunate to have a really robust TV career, which then led me to an exciting opportunity to direct a pilot for ABC. And it was Jessica Gao's project. It was called the Untitled Jessica Gao Project, forever titled that. And I remember when my agent was trying to make my deal, she called me and she said, I don't know if this can be true. I don't know if this is possible, but I thought I'd dig into CAA's, you know, like older files to look at, you know, a first-time pilot director's deals. And what I'm starting to realize is that you might be the first Asian American woman to direct a comedy pilot for a network ever.
What?
I was like, that's not possible. That's not possible. She's like, I know, it sounds crazy. Well, we're going to do some research. And sure enough, her assistant started to do some research. And what they figured out was no woman of color had directed a network pilot since Deborah Allen, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in 1993.
Yeah, that's a long time ago.
So it had been 30 something years
yeah.
since a woman of color directed a network pilot, and a comedy pilot specifically, comedy pilot. And I thought, wow, if I'm the first one, then I feel like it's kind of sad, but I'm also glad here I am at this door, and I'm going to stick my foot in that door and make sure that there's going to be other opportunities, because that's what you become. You don't intend to become a symbol, but all of a sudden you are this symbol, and it's such an important symbol. And so I'm proud to be that symbol, and hopefully I won't be the last one that gets that opportunity.
Not just a symbol, but sort of a facilitator for future generations to have the opportunity to come in. So I think it's a really powerful symbol and position to be in. And you know, Giang winning the Oscar. I mean, every headline was the first. There's a lot of firsts, but I think that's exciting. So anybody else would love to share the breakthrough moment for your career you felt?
Well, actually, I would love to just talk a little bit about like symbols and being the first and things like that, because I think that there's, you know, it's such a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's so wonderful and, you know, worthy of celebration, but on the other hand, you also feel bummed out because you're like, it's 2021. Why are we celebrating firsts of any kind?
Yeah.
And the other thing too that I think people who aren't in an underrepresented group have trouble understanding is the pressure and the weight of it, you know, because when you are, you know, pioneering or at the beginning or at the forefront of something, there's so much pressure on you because you have to represent an entire community. I would love to be able to just do my job and that's it, and leave everything else and only have to think about my job while I'm doing my job. But I have to think about all these other things too. And I have to think about protecting my community, and I have to think about like representing my community too. And all of that is just a lot of weight for people of color, you know, and that's something that I think people don't understand unless they are in that position. So it's extra hard.
There's a question about, do you remember any particular obstacles you encountered and how you met that challenge? So do you think that what you're talking about is considered somewhat of an obstacle?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, there's been a lot of time. I mean, especially the first half of my career, more often than not, I was the only woman and the only person of color in the room, you know, and that's a very unfair position. And it's a near unwinnable position to be in, because usually you're probably at the lower levels, you know, you have very little power. You also feel like you don't really have any backup. And also, you don't have anybody there who can corroborate your experience and say, yes, that is how it is. It's not just her. Like it's a whole thing, you know? And also you don't want to be, you know, marked as the PC police or the wet blanket. You don't want to ruin things for everybody else. Like Jude said, you know, holding the door open for everybody else, because if you make a bad impression, it's not just you, this person made a bad impression. It's all women, or it's all Asian people, or it's all people of color. This is why we don't want this person, you know, this is why we shouldn't have somebody on this project, because now we're leashed or whatever. We've been muzzled. And so you have to figure out these like creative ways to tiptoe and tap dance around, you know, fragile egos, in order to save your people and protect your community. And you're doing that while you're also thinking like, how can I, you know, work hard and protect my career so that I can make it to a position of power where I then can make decisions that actually help people.
Early on in my career, a lot of the questions that I got from journalists was like, how does it feel to be the token Asian? And that's something that would offend me now, but back then was like, well, would you want a token Asian or no Asians at all? Because I fought for this role and it was open to everyone and I fought for it and I got it. So is it bad that I'm here? Is it bad that I'm representing, that I'm the only one? And now I feel like it's not enough, you know, even for, you know, I guess Silicon Valley is an example. It's like, oh my God, they have more than one Asian on a show. That's huge. You know what I mean? So yeah, every little bit is progress. And, you know, I think the success will come when we don't have to have these discussions, but that's going to take a while. And as some would say, trailblazing, like, you know, our careers and our success pushes the needle just a little bit to, you know, the right and a little bit forward. And I feel like we just have to use this momentum and continue on. But I feel like any job, any role, that's why I'm like such an advocate for supporting all Asians. Like, who are we seeing? Okay, great. Let's give them a shout out. Let's, you know, tell everyone to watch this show, because that support means everything. But that's the only way I think also shows our success. And then, you know, from a business standpoint, it's like, all right, let's just, let's continue this thing with like telling Asian stories, right?
And having them be successful, and then Hollywood wants to make more, or we make more, and that's just how it keeps going. And unfortunately, that's
the truth of this business.
Yeah, it's business, you know. So do you guys remember any particular obstacles you encountered, and how did you meet that challenge?
Something Jamie just mentioned is something definitely I've experienced on a set. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've been on a set where either an actor or even a crew member has come up to me and has been like, you're the first female director I've worked with, or you're the first Asian female director I've worked with, or whatever. And on one hand, that's great. You know, I hope to have a good experience with them. But at the same time, as Jessica Gao mentioned earlier, that, you know, it's a little bit of a burden as well, because you don't just get judged, you know, based on your work alone, right? Suddenly you become symbolic or representative of an entire group. And in my case, two groups, women and minorities. And I think one of the hurdles and the problems I've tried to overcome is that there's an assumption that the reason I'm there is because of tokenism, that because productions and studios are now forced to diversify and forced to hire women and forced to hire people of color. Well, Jude Wayne, you check 2 boxes. And so maybe you're here because you help other people check boxes, but are you really good? So I feel like I walk onto a set with more skepticism that would normally be given a new director. And when I say new, I don't mean new like I've, just started directing. New as in they haven't worked with me before. Because if you look at my IMDb list, you'll see that I've directed, 40 episodes of television. I'm not a new director. However, because they haven't worked with me before, and because you're a woman and because you're a minority, there's this extra layer of skepticism that I feel like I have to work harder to earn. And I will tell you, this is how I do it. I kill them with kindness, always. I kill them with excellence, and I kill them with tremendous amount of preparation. And so that when I show up, people are like, holy shit, like from the moment I open my mouth, they know I know how to run a set. And then guess what? They shut up. What I frequently find on my first day on set is that there's that skepticism, there's that distance. And then after lunch, after they've worked with me, almost everybody's gone to IMDb and actually looked at my credits. And then there's this warmth and kindness after lunch where people are like, oh my God, you worked on The Good Place. It's one of my favorite shows. I didn't know you directed Finding Ohana on Netflix. My kids love that movie. Right. And I find that happens quite a bit. It's like, and I can't help but wonder, I wonder if like white male directors have to deal with that problem.
Yeah.
Not really. So I did a presentation actually on just sort of that topic, like how women are treated differently and how women of color are really treated differently. And interestingly, like among women, like all of us have experienced gender bias, right? But women of color experience it in different ways. And it's actually often used to divide and conquer us. But Asian American women are viewed as, it's a B-school calculation. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like open, closed, cold, warm. And white men are viewed as open and warm, which is the best thing to be. So they're just automatically given respect and prestige and considered to be competent. Asian American women are considered to be cold, but competent, meaning that for things like, well, law work, for example, like I would get hired pretty easily, but I wouldn't get promoted. And so I imagine it's seen probably more with directing, producing these sort of big power positions. People are actually at the outset less comfortable with particularly Asian American women. Obviously, like all women of color have problems with this, but Asians in particular are considered to be these cold competents that are not from the outset always appreciated in the leadership position. So I love that you do that. I love that you kill them with kindness. I think that's the best way to do it. Just be excellent and be kind.
So what more do you wish to achieve in your career?
I love my own show. Love the show, hire the directors, hire the writers, hold all the power, get to tell our stories, hire my friends, and not be ashamed of the fact that there's too many Asians in a room.
And we're getting there. I'm working on a film now where the leads are Asian and the lists are longer, and I'm meeting so many people that are in the business that I haven't met you guys. Really, I know of you guys, but I haven't met you guys. So this is how it all begins, and we form stronger bonds, and we, like you said, exchange information and have these resources and be able to help each other and bolster each other. And that's how we just become less of a novelty and more of a majority.
The way I want to approach my career is just in a very collaborative way. I don't have any interest in sort of the sharp elbows and the shoving, because that's just not, life is short. And I'd rather just spend it being happy with people I love and want to work with.
So in closing, to the people who are watching, if you could share one tip on how they can move forward in whatever career they want to pursue in this business, what would that be?
I would advise start writing your own stories. I think it's such a powerful thing to have control of the narrative, even as an actor.
I have this exercise that I do with a lot of people. It doesn't matter what industry that you're in. I ask them what is their intention word. Distill what you want into one word and write it on a Post-it note and put it somewhere where you're going to see it every single day, like where you brush your teeth, for example. I did this for myself as well. And when you have that intention word, it distills all of your dreams into something that's actionable. And I think part of the problem with people who just have dreams is they let it stay dreams. And for me, I'm a person of action. I make stuff happen. And I think it's really important for people to give themselves words and ideas that force them to act every single day. And by the way, your intention word changes. About 7 years ago, when I was still trying to break into directing, and by the way, 7 years ago, I was getting an application from Starbucks because nobody was hiring me as a director. And over time, I realized, stop hiding who I am. I need to shine. And that was my word, was to shine, to not hold back, to let who I was really who I was on the inside, and just let that out with no shame. And once I started to shine at these interviews, guess what? People wanted to not just hire me. My mentor from HBO says, I make hiring decisions based on who I want to continue a conversation with. And all of a sudden, because I was shining, I was somebody people wanted to have a conversation with again and again and again. And so, and now my new intention word is alacrity. And alacrity means brisk, ready cheerfulness. That is my approach to life, and that is my approach to work.
Bravo. Thank you.
I guess just bouncing off what they said, I'd say create your own projects, be focused, and then all I'd add in is to just, and this is a hard thing that I think, at least for me anyways, is going to take my whole life and I'll probably never accomplish it, but to just be happy with yourself, to just be happy, focused, and okay with who you are, so that all these external things are just things and you can just let them wash off you because you're confident and you're okay with who you are.
That's great. I think we strive for that individually every day. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great weekend coming up.
The industry as a whole, definitely has to have people behind the camera, not just actors. But obviously, we all know, you have to have the showrunners, the entertainment executives, the writers, the directors, we need all the voices on that end. I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't know already, but we really, really, really have to practice it. It's one thing to say it, another thing to do it,
It's so funny because it's the whole thing, about being an ally and then being a co-conspirator, and having thought that I was a wonderful ally my whole life, and I've been so wonderful with people, and then checking that and going like, but have I? And what does it mean to be a co-conspirator in our business? What does it mean to really stand up and fight for someone, or really challenge systems? It's such tireless, it's hard work, it's really hard work, but it's continuous work. And for me, it's a personal process of checking myself every step of the way, stopping and going, okay, that was true yesterday. And what I understood a year ago was a year ago. What do I understand today and what I want to know today, and that's like, it's I want to say it's hard work, but it is inspiring work. And it's like back to my story about my being in everyone's shoes, it's discovery, and it is believing in, and it's asking hard questions and asking questions, and going out on a limb and saying, I don't understand this. And so how do I understand? And what do I need to do to understand more in order to be an ally, and to be a co-conspirator? As a casting director, you can't speak on someone's behalf until you really, really understand what needs to be said, and then you can, in the room, have conversations and open other people's minds and say, whether it's performers with disabilities or the trans community or whatever it is, I'm still firmly believe this, that as casting directors, the more information, the more empowered we are, the more information we have, the more we can do great work, number one. And number two, the more we can create this ripple effect where we say, that's just not really how you phrase that in a room. And people feel enlightened and they learn. I joke about the fact that when you give someone the tools to think that the idea was theirs, they feel empowered, and then they continue to follow through on the idea or the concept, or do that good work, and that's the joy of it, really, is to say if they thought it was their idea, they think it's a great idea, and then they run with it, and then it's sustainable and it doesn't go away.
One of the things that I'm just sort of hearing that I want to just sort of like echo is that it feels like the word ally is a verb, right? And that allyship is active and it evolves, right? Like to your point, Russell. And it's also rooted, as Whitney said, in this real realization that what we see matters, right? What that representation matters. Like, I sometimes think about not just entertainment as its own industry, but I think about entertainment within a political landscape, right? And like, I can't escape that in a country like America, right? Like, even when we consider Broadway or Hollywood, for me, we are still rooted in a country that is the United States of America, and its government and its politics. And I think about not even just like what representation means on the stage or on the screen, but I think about that photo of Obama where he's like bowing his head and there's this little black boy who's touching his hair, right? Because it's like, you have hair just like me. Like, that's that image, and that is powerful. Or I even think about like the bust of Cesar Chavez that is currently on Biden's desk, right? Behind his desk in the Oval Office. And I think about how that image alone affirmed so much for Latinos in this country, just to see that image there, right? And so I think what I'm trying to just get at here is that we know that representation matters, even outside of entertainment, on a political sphere. And that we, within this ecosystem of the industry, that we can practice allyship as an active daily verb, right? And for me, really what is at the root of allyship is coalition. And it means that I'm building coalition with you, Russell, with you, Marcy, with you, Whitney, right? Not just as casting directors or casting professionals, but as producers, as directors, as writers, because really what we want to do is evolve, you know, the bones of this industry into something that's much more dynamic and healthy and makes more space for Asian folks, right? For trans folks, for non-binary folks, for Black folks, for Latinx folks, for folks with disabilities. And for me, all of this is so connected. Like, if I pull at one thread, even of the question of like, what is an ally? You know, it's like representation and coalition building and all of that and politicalness. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is really a lifetime's work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, everything is political. I mean, I'm an activist since I was 14. And Neil Simon had a line once that I loved where someone said, oh, for you, everything is political. And he goes, yeah, the soup in my bowl is political. Everything is political. And we can't forget that we all do things in our own way. Well, we're not all activists, but me, I do things in my way. And I have, again, since I was a teenager, I put the active in activist, to actively do things. And I think it's very important.
Yeah. I just had a conversation with my best friend, and we were talking about proactive activism, right? And how this thing has to always be moving. And, you know, Victor, what you said about like building these coalitions, you are absolutely right. It's not only, it's mentorship, it's, you know, connecting people to work and jobs. It's standing up and being like, hey, this isn't cool, or hey, we're not being inclusive in this area. Or, you know, it's for me, sometimes that allyship and that proactive allyship shows up like in reading story and being like, yo, this is not, like, what are we even talking about here? Like, this is wrong. Or speaking out in a meeting and having these really, really uncomfortable conversations, because for me, without challenging the system and having the uncomfortable conversations that are very awkward and sometimes scary to have, we're not going to see that change. And, you know, I don't know if you all know, but I left CBS in a bit of a kind of burnt. Someone told me recently that like I tried to burn the place to the ground when I left, which I didn't. But I wanted to use my position to really create change, and it was uncomfortable and it was scary to call out the place that I had, you know, begin my career as like this wide-eyed girl from Kansas, you know. But what I saw happening, not just at CBS, but in the industry as a whole, I felt like if this is the system that I'm going to be working in, I don't want to work here anymore. And so I called it out very publicly in writing a letter in Variety. But, you know, it wasn't so much for, it was about allyship. You know, it was about me saying that there's a change that needs to happen. And it's not just from a Black perspective, but that we have been kept out of this industry. We've been kept out of corners, but it's not even Hollywood. It's like the entire country, especially, you know, people of color, talent with disabilities, you know, queer people of color. Like, it needs to change. And I think that we have to call it out. We have to get uncomfortable. We have to champion other voices. And it's so important. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And things to take back into our own little areas of the industry.
No great change in history has ever happened smooth sailing. It's never been like, hey, let's make this change. Oh, okay. It's always been messy, and it's always been through a lot of pain and difficulty.
And I think right now, with what we see going on in the AAPI community, what we've seen with the history, throughout the history of Black Americans in this country, what we are seeing happening at the border, you know, I mean, we could be here all day talking about like where are those communities that really need the support of allies. But I think we as storytellers or who have involvement in story, like, it's a really great season to be working in this industry because people turn to film and television in times like these, whether it's to be, you know, to escape, to dream, to aspire to something else, but most importantly, to actually see people. And I'm excited. I'm really excited to be here in my career right now.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing that I would like to challenge is this age-old thing, whatever, for want of a better word, of us wanting to hire people that look and sound like us because it's easy, you know, to do that. And I think it's true of any business, but in the film business, it's got us into a lot of trouble because you hire people that look and sound like you because it's easy, because then you don't have to do much work, you don't have to do much training. They're on your page, they work the same as you, they speak the same language as you, and then you hire them. And we've continued to do that, which has become so exclusionary because how much joy and what a wonderful place to be in, to say, I don't, and I want to work, and I want to work with you, and I want to introduce you to this career path that you may have never experienced or have had any move into, and help you with that transition. And then, as we mentioned mentorship, part of it, you know, and then mentor someone who is just historically being excluded. We can't just open a door and say, come on in, everyone, because it doesn't work like that. That's not how we got in. We've worked slowly, you know. And I look at the people who are doing the hiring, and I challenge those people in positions to hire other people, to say, don't hire someone who looks and sounds like you. Hire someone who's going to make you a better person, and you're going to give an opportunity to, through knowledge and information and learning. And, you know, Victor, you know, you said it, but I'm not a big political guy. I did my political time I did in Africa, and then came to the States. It was like, whoa. But I do think that in the entertainment business, you're right. And what's cool about it is we're kind of sneaky in our business because people don't expect that from us because they don't see the power. They just see what they see. And if we start to change what they see, it kind of just becomes normal, for want of a better word, without necessarily doing something very activist, very politically activist. And Marcy, you're right. Like that's the only way you get stuff done. Like you look historically, any great change in this country or any country in the world has been because someone fought or died or paid a very, very high price. I think the movie business has an opportunity to do it in a subtle, meaningful, sustainable way. You know, if we really, really work together, we can do that. You know?
Absolutely.
You know, Russell, I think what I just wanted to say about that is that sometimes we don't have to be subtle, right? Like sometimes I think that intentionality can also be powerful. And I think that there's space for all of that, right? There's space for subtlety and also for like just full on, like in your face, this is what it's going to be. And I say that just because I think, you know, I want to get some of the numbers out there right now, right? Like, and I sort of wrote this down because I wanted to get it right. But according to the UCLA diversity report, right? So the School of Social Sciences releases a yearly or annually a diversity
and they
report.
left out people of disabilities completely, which we were crazy about and mad about. But you know, all doing
and so the
all work in progress.
And so the focus right now of that report, the report is on gender, I believe, and also race and ethnicity, right? And so what that report said at the latest report actually was that Asian actors accounted for 1.8% of lead roles in digital scripted shows, right? And the data showed that Asian actors actually sustained modest losses in this category over the past few years. So even as we're talking about Asian representation, right, in TV and film, even the larger numbers, I believe in film, 3 out of 10 leads are cast with people of color, right? In TV, I believe in the scripted and the broadcast, the digital and the broadcast, it's 2.4 out of 10 leads are cast with people of color, right? And people of color in that sense is sort of just like a lumped data set, right? So we're not even specific about like Black folks, Latina folks, Latina folks, Asian folks, right? Middle Eastern folks, like it's sort of just like 2.4 out of 10 and the rest is white. And so the thing that I want to sort of name here is that this work, we all have different angles, right, of how we want to enter this work. And I believe, personally speaking for myself, that this requires radical change. That this requires radical work. That it's not something that we can be entirely subtle about, because even as we talk about diasporas, right? Like one of the things that like me, even myself as being Mexican American, first generation in this country, when we talk about Latinidad, I think about diasporas, right? And I think about how in Latin America, there are 33 countries, right? In Asia, the Asian diaspora, there are 48 countries with hundreds of languages and dialects. And so I just think about these sort of like umbrella terms, and I think, okay, you know, how can we grapple with these diasporas that are so rich and vast, and then also get specific within them, right? And I think about that intentionality. I think about that in our processes a lot. I think about like, how do we get specific? I think about how does identity influence the way that we do our work? Because ultimately all of those questions for me lead into your point, Russell, about how this work feels like it actually impacts the imagination of the world. And it's actually imagination work, right? That casting somehow, even it's when it's invisible, right? That we as casting directors are also artists that are helping to really craft and help create this world along with the creative team, so that an audience can imagine the world in a new way. And when we put an Asian person as the CEO of a major, you know, a major company, guess what? That is inspiration for somebody watching that film or that TV show. That is the sort of realization of like, oh, I can do that too, right? And I think that that's the sort of power of all this work as I think about it. And so I just wanted to say that because I think that that's sort of like me touching on multiple points that you all were making.
Yeah, no, Victor, I'd like to add to that because representation alone is not the only issue. It's because representation of a stereotype is not representation.
Yeah.
You know, when will people just open up their minds to see that we're all very, very complex and we all have thousands of songs within us, and to represent that is true representation. Just to say, oh, look at the numbers, look how many people, that's not the whole issue. That's only a small part of it.
I firmly believe that until boardrooms, C-suites, boards reflect the audience, reflect the stories we're telling, reflect that change that we want to see, that we have a lot of work ahead of us. But I'm excited to get down in the dirt with a shovel and, you know, I guess bulldozer, and do the work with each and every one of you.
Thank you so much for joining us in conversations around the groundwork. Share and come back and listen again and again. These conversations are meant to spark dialogue and inspire change, and it is only the beginning. We have several roundtable discussions planned throughout Asian Heritage Month, and our live town hall, Asian Visibility Through an Industry Lens, is awaiting your RSVP. Thanks again.